Good day, everybody, and welcome to the off season here on Fantasy MLB Today. I am Anthony Cates, and I'll be your host today. And we're doing something a little different. Today, we're sitting down with Mike Mager. He's a high stakes fantasy baseball player, winner of the 2024 NFBC Auction Championship, where he did set the new record for most points scored overall with 1,515.5. Placed two teams in the top 10 in the Auction Championship. And for the first time, he is the winner of the New York Ultimate League, which is a invitation-only high-stakes league. He's a winner of 4 main event league titles, one of just 40 fantasy managers to win 4 or more main event league titles in FBC history. He's a writer and analyst at For the Numbers Fantasy, a.k.a. FTN Fantasy, and last but not least, a Yankees fan. Today, we're going to discuss his auction and redraft strategies, how to use your free agent acquisition budget in season. We're going to talk about how he built these winning teams this past season and how he prepares for high stakes leagues in the off season. First of all, how you doing today, Mike? Be all right?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Awesome, Mike. Well, we're glad to have you here. So you had these two pretty big wins, right? The Auction Championship League, always one of the bigger ones. And then the Ultimate League, that's some high rollers and some of the best of the biz in there. How does it feel right now going into the offseason to be sitting atop of these mountains?
It feels great. Those are two of my biggest leagues last year. It feels great. I had been chasing an overall title for a long time, had come close and was thrilled and somewhat relieved to take one down. And the ultimate, the MTM or Mike the Mouse Ultimate League, is probably my favorite league of all because of certain special things that Mike the Mouse Machado puts into that league. It's a great time. It's a standalone high stakes league that I've been drafting in for a while, and it's just a ton of fun and felt great to take that league down this past year.
Well, that's awesome. Obviously, both difficult to win leagues. And what I want to know first is what do you do? The season's over, right? Now it's October 1st. Are we getting ready for next year right away? Is Mike taking a vacation? I mean, you won 70,000 roughly combined between those two leagues. Are we kicking back? Are we hopping on a cruise ship? What's going on with you at the end of the season?
No, I took most of the playoffs off and just sat back and enjoyed the playoffs. But since then, I've been back into it. It's November 20th now. I'm on my third Draft Champions League for next year. And I have my dance card planned out for the live events in March, and prep is underway.
No rest, right? You're a champion. Champions don't take days off. We're not resting. We're diving in right away.
Well, it's I kind of like the year-long nature of it. I mean, it's I love managing fantasy baseball teams, but it's a 6-month grind. I manage a lot of teams, and they're very competitive leagues, and it's a lot of work, and it's quite the grind. And by the time the season ends, it's been 6 months since I've drafted, and that's a hell of a lot of fun to do drafts. So I very much enjoy kind of the prep and drafting process in the baseball off season, and then rinse repeat 6 months later and back into managing my teams.
Yeah, I understand. I get that feeling too. I think I do think the draft is probably the best part of fantasy baseball. Building that brand new team, having some new players to cheer for you didn't draft before, getting that chance to draft Shohei or Aaron Judge you weren't able to in the past or something like that. And what I want to do tonight is we'll talk. When we kick it off, talking about your auction championship team.
Sure.
Well, I'm not a big auction player. I do have one league. It's a dynasty league that I play auction in, but those prices are going to be vastly different than the kind you play in, right? Because we have contracts and who has how much budget left over. But before we hop in, we're going to talk about our sponsor real quick. That's BetOnline. And BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds and everything from football, NBA, and college basketball, NHL, the UFC, and MMA, head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, so Mike, what I want to do is start with the auction draft.
Okay.
I was kind of taking a look over your team that you drafted last year, and I think the first thing that really stuck out to me, and I want to know if this was a plan or not, is that you only spent more than $20 on 3 players, and that was Shohei Ohtani, Matt Olson, and Framber Valdez. Is this kind of how you draft on average, or you just kind of let the prices come to you as you're going?
It wasn't my intent, but it is somewhat consistent with how I usually draft hitting. I do like to get a couple of big hitters, $30 plus hitters, but usually not at the highest end of the range. I'm usually not, like I wasn't drafting Ronald Acuna last year and paying like $50 plus. But I usually like to get a couple of big hitters and then spread the hitting money around. On the pitching side, I do normally spend up for 2 aces and usually at least 1 great closer. But the starting pitching prices were much higher than I had anticipated in my auction. I kind of pivoted. I wound up with Framber, but then I decided to spread the money around, and I spent up for. I had rostered Emmanuel Clase at $19, so just under that 20. And when I couldn't find a second ace to go with Framber Valdez at a price that I was comfortable paying, I kind of pivoted, reallocated some of the funds. I put more money into a second closer and lucked out with Brian Helsley, who had a career year. And that and then put the rest of the money I would have spent on a second, SP1 type into my other starters. So it wasn't a plan. I'm usually not going to be bidding on like the top 2 or 3 highest players, but I do like to get a couple of higher priced hitters and pitchers and then spread the money around.
Oh yeah, I will say you absolutely nailed the closers. Helsley and Clase for 32 combined for what they did last season was just you couldn't ask for better relief seasons. I think I think you got was RP1 and like RP3, which is amazing. And I'd say you're pitching like you said. You don't really have an SP1, but you got 170 innings out of Nestor Cortez. You got a really up and down but good overall season out of Bryce Miller. Pepio was a really good, and for $7, I think you probably he had a far earned $7 for you.
Oh yeah.
And then on the offensive side, like you said, you went for the 2 big guys. Obviously, Matt Olson didn't really end up living up to that $31 price, but I don't think anyone on the Braves actually lived up to their auction prices this past season. That whole offense seemed to struggle with and without Acuna. I don't know if that second half of the year, Matt Olson and Austin Riley came alive a little bit, I'd say. But for the most part, that was disappointment. But you hit it out of the park. William Contreras ended up being catcher number 1 at the end of the year. Shohei Ohtani was worth about $8,000 by the end of the year, I'd say. So to get him for $35 is an outright bargain. And then on your reserve.
Quick story on Shohei before we move on. This auction took place the day after the big story broke, where his interpreter had been caught gambling, and there were questions on whether it was the interpreter who had lost all these millions of dollars, or was he really kind of the front for Shohei? Was Shohei gambling or not? And it did impact his auction prices. He was usually $40 or maybe low 40s. And because of the uncertainty at the time, I was able to get him for 35, and it worked out, great for me, but it could have been a disaster depending on how that story, fell out.
That's true. Is you kind of right place, right time for you where a couple guys in the league were probably like, I don't know, I mean, 36, $37 might be a little too rich for someone who might not play this year, might get a partial suspension, might be under investigation. We didn't know how well would Otani hold up with that. Everyone was told how good of friends he was with his interpreter. So I don't know about you. I don't know about you. If my best friend's under investigation for something federally, that would affect my life a little bit. So the fact that Otani still went out there and the 50-50 season, almost a 66, it felt like that last week of the season, Shohei was really trying to hit 10 home runs and get 10 stolen bases in 7 days. But yeah, I really liked, you hit well on some of those guys. But like most leagues, you're not going to win your league at the draft, right? Especially in an auction league. Just one guy goes down that cost you $37. If you had Ronald Acuna last year, you spent $65 on him, $60 on him. That's going to ruin a season. That'll really do it. But I want to say I did like with your reserve round, I know if you hit, in my opinion, you had a home run with Bryce Terang. I know he wasn't great all year, but since this was Roto, it's a little bit easier for him to struggle as long as you're getting the stats early. And then Jared Jones, I considered kind of like a double because you got 2 parts of the season out of him, and he was pretty good overall. But when you go into your reserve draft after an auction, how do you decide who and what to target in the reserve draft?
I think there's a couple of factors. One is, in an auction, there's 23 rounds of the auction process, and you have to fill out a legal lineup. So at the end of every auction, there are some players that probably should have been auctioned but weren't, and they're kind of slipped through the cracks that, people they couldn't auction an unbalanced team. You have to fill out the 23-man legal roster. So invariably, there are some players that, probably should have been auctioned but weren't. So those usually are the highest priority for me. And I thought Terang was one of them. After that, I'm looking at my team and where's my team weak. And I felt I was weak at starting pitcher just because I didn't get my second ace. I had really wanted a couple of aces. So I did prioritize. I drafted JP Sears before Jared Jones. Just fortunate for me that Jones panned out so well. So I guess, the 3 things I look for, I guess, are one, did any players slide through the auction that should really be snatched up as soon as possible, the higher talent guys? 2, what are the holes in my roster that I'm trying to fix in the reserve rounds? And 3, just, an upside pick. I took, and these picks didn't work out at all, but I took David Robertson and Justin Lawrence just to kind of see would they get their closing job or not. I think at the end of a draft, that sometimes it's good to speculate on a closer, because if they don't get the job, you could just quickly cut them and move on, and you haven't, really lost anything. So those are kind of the general principles I follow for the reserve rounds.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you on those last 2 or 3 rounds of any draft, be it the reserves on an auction or just a regular draft, is kind of the dart throws, as you say, the speculative saves, maybe early season call up that you just don't want to let someone get off the waiver wire leader or something. Yeah, I did notice that. I know, Lawrence, he got a few saves before the Rockies realized that man was not a closer. And David Robertson, I think we were all pulling for him for a little while there in Texas before it ultimately went to Kirby Yates.
Yep.
Closed it out most of the year. Now let's talk free agent acquisition budget, because I was looking through your moves, and out of any league I've been in, any of the leagues I've looked in, you probably had 2 of the most impactful FAAB pickups in any league I've ever seen. And that was on April 14th, you grabbed Jerickson Profar for $13, who were 2 weeks into the season, and he's doing okay. Like he looks good, but it's a 390 BABIP. It's only a couple of home runs. And then the following weekend, probably the greatest waiver wire pickup in this league, you got Brent Rooker for $32. At that point, he had just come off of the IL. He'd been healthy for 3 days from the IL. He hit 205 with only 4 home runs. You got 35 home runs, 100 plus RPI. You got a first round season off the waiver wire.
Yeah.
My question is, when you're looking, especially in those first couple of weeks, how do you make a decision on hot hitters or a cold hitter like Rooker and decide to bid that kind of money on them?
I think at least in early to mid-April, I think the best strategy would be to try to ignore their stats for the season. I mean, it's just too small a sample size. And I think you have to look kind of under the hood. I mean, Rooker was coming off, I think, a 30 home run season, and he appeared to have playing time. And same with Profar. I don't remember exactly where he was hitting, but he was pretty high up in the lineup, I believe, and he was getting regular playing time. He had never, he didn't have a great back of the baseball card going into the year, but he was always a high prospect. He always had, certain skills, and honestly, they both exceeded my expectations enormously. So I mean, there's always some element of luck in hitting these. You're hoping for good performance, and then you get great performance. I can't say that I was expecting anything close to what they provided, but they were at that point. You're trying to be aggressive early in the season and jump on players whose circumstances have changed since the draft, where a Rooker might get dropped because he got hurt early, or Profar falls into regular playing time, and you want to jump on it. So I guessed right, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, on those two, after like that, I saw Brent Rooker right there. That one up blew my mind. I was like, if I had found him on the waiver wire in any of my other leagues and I didn't grab him early, I probably would have regretted it. And then I also noticed you, compared to some of these I was in, you aren't necessarily a big spender. The biggest you spent was on Reese Olson. You spent $130 on him back on June 9th. But I think he was healthy. He's coming back off the IL, I think, which is probably why he was on the waiver wire to begin with. Someone couldn't hold him. But are you averse to spending multiple $100s on like a top freeze? Like if Paul Skeens would have been available, would you have just been like, hey, we got to throw the budget at him? Or do you like to have plenty to spend throughout the year so you kind of limit taking the super big swings like that?
Yeah, I'm recently more of the type to not take big swings. I in the past I have, once a year for each team would probably spend $200-300 on the next great call up, and more often than not, it did not work out. And I guess I've gotten to the point where I trust my process enough that I would rather FAAB $10-20 players than take a shot at one $200 player. I think I can. I think I can get more value having the extra shots in the fire. And so Reese Olson I think was a little different. I was willing to go into triple digits for him, not by much, but for 130, because he was not a prospect. He was off to a fantastic start and got dropped due to an injury and was coming back. And so for a more established player, I guess I'm willing to bid higher. So I think if in my leagues there's an established player or a player coming back from injury that has a track record that I'm really confident in, I'm not afraid to bid a lot, but I'm probably not the type to be throwing $200, $300, $400 at a untested prospect. I mean, I think maybe I would make an exception for Skeens, like someone really at that very, very elite level. But honestly, if Skeens was in the FAAB pool instead of being drafted, I would probably not be the guy to get it. Even if I went into the triple figures, there would always be multiple teams probably willing to go higher than me on someone without a track record.
Okay, see, that's something I'm having to learn as I play, because I'm willing to take the big risk. Like I see, like, oh, we get $1,000. I'm like, I could drop 300 on someone who I think is going to be an absolute stud, which it did work out for me 2 years ago whenever Ellie De La Cruz got the call. And
Oh,
I spent, let's see here, that'd have been July, I think, when he got the call up. And I spent well over $300. I was able to get him and got a great season, great half season out of him. Of course, this past year he was wonderful. But I do like how you said, how like instead of spending the $200 on one big one, you can spread out 10, 15, $20 on more bites, which gives you more chances to really succeed. And, going through, I can look and see your moves where, maybe if you had spent 200, 250 on Olsen, you wouldn't have had the chance to risk 45 on Hunter Green later in the year. Run Xavier Matthews out there, who I think we all had big hopes for, and he did disappoint a little bit, but I think it was there. And, you have extra left over for September when guys are coming back healthy, or you have that, let me get the best 4 weeks of my season in right now, so my contract looks good in the off season, or I'm looking better for April. But yeah, I can understand that it's tough to spend $200-300 on a guy, and if it doesn't work out, that's gone. I'd rather lose $30 and be okay with it.
Yeah, that's what I've kind of gravitated towards. I mean, there will always be prospects or certain players that come up that are worth the two, three, $400. But I guess I found the majority of them are not, and my ability to pick the one guy that is worth it hasn't been good in the past. So at least for me, the better strategy is the extra shots, the extra bites at the apple.
All right, and now what I wanted to talk about is coming into the season. I don't know if you prefer auction leagues more to regular draft leagues. It's kind of even, but how do you prep for your auction leagues compared to your redraft leagues? Like, do you have your own system on developing your values for your players? Do you kind of use a mix of different sites? How do you break that down and really get yourself, especially for the high stakes leagues, right? The auction championship, stuff like that, where you're going up against guys like you said that this is a 365-day a year game, and as soon as the season's over, we're already looking at the next season.
Sure. I think the bulk of my prep is applicable to both stakes and auctions, and I just kind of got in the habit over the years of doing what I call deep dives on all of the fantasy relevant players in the off season. I mean, I watch a ton of baseball, but I always have retained things better when I write them down, and so I'm a very fast typist, and I kind of, in a way, kind of write my own draft guide just for my just for myself and my partner on the auction team. So I'll get to that, but I I kind of do one page of stats and notes on every fantasy relevant player in the off season. That's kind of how I do the bulk of my prep, and I dive into the players, and I kind of rank them by position, but also I'm kind of figuring out which players I really like and what I don't. And I'm doing draft champions leagues throughout the winter, and kind of getting an additional feel for the player pool and where players are going and what different builds are like. I like to purposefully set my KDS. So in these draft champions leagues, I'll do some hopefully at the front of the draft, some in the middle, some at the back of the draft, and I'll try different different builds where I may go pitching heavy early or hitting heavy early, and just kind of get a sense. If I wait on closers, where am I comfortable? How far back am I comfortable going, and still having confidence in them? And so, I mean, I try to win all of these leagues. I take them very seriously. So it's not like I'm just kind of experimenting just to have fun, but I do try to do different builds and still build winning teams. And so, I usually rely on my rankings a lot for my stake drafts, and I'll look at projections for those, but I'm not a huge projections guy. I tend to use projections more as a check. Like I'll see how the projections compare to my rankings, and if my rankings are really far off from the projections in one direction or the other, that means I need to dig into that player more and decide whether I kind of trust my ranking more, or maybe I'm off base and should pay more attention to the projections. And then for auctions, it's really helpful to have dollar values, kind of your own dollar values to work off of. I don't treat them as gospel or religiously that I have to adhere to them, by the dollar or anything like that. But I do find it helpful. I do some auctions as solo efforts and some with my really good friend Mark Winoker, who's also an experienced NFBC player who really loves auctions in particular. I love them both. I guess if given a choice, I find auctions more fun to draft, but I still enjoy stake drafts a lot. But Mark usually I'll share my deep dives and player analysis with him, and he'll run SGPs and get dollar values that we'll work off of. And as we prep for auctions together, we'll talk about the players and develop a shared strategy for those auctions. And we've had a lot of success. That the other team you mentioned, the team that came in 5th overall in the auction championship contest, was a shared team with Mark that we had together. So I guess that's kind of an overview of my prep. Happy to dive into more if you want, but that's kind of the 30,000-foot level view.
No, I mean, I like it. That's really awesome. I know you said some things that I've heard other people say, is that sometimes it's the best thing to do is to kind of build your own values. Look in there, don't, like you said, don't be kind of attached to any one specific source. Like you said, your whatever you value them at isn't the gospel. Maybe you got a guy at $35, but you're looking around the league and realizing, okay, he's going to be 37 or $38 because of this. Then you got to go, am I willing to pay that? All right, that's $3 coming, extra $3 coming out here. How does that affect the bottom line? Right. And I like that you do a bunch of different drafts in the leading up to the auction championships, like you said. So you kind of understand a couple of different builds. You trust yourself. You have enough experience to trust the decisions you're making and going, hey, I know that if I don't pay $20 for a top closer now, I'm going to want to spend $30 on 2 guys later. I want to lock it in. Right. And so, yeah, I like that's something I've, like I said, I don't play a lot of auctions. So I fly by my dynasty league. It's a lot of flying by the seat of my pants, just because it depends on how much I have available. We had the guy who has LA Cruz right now has him for $4 for 3 more years. Like, that's the kind of stuff that really greatly affects the value of everyone else in the league. So that's why I was really interested in getting your thoughts on how you do it with these redraft auction leagues, because sometimes I'll look at values. I subscribe to FTN too, and I'll go over there and look, and I'm like, I couldn't imagine paying $68 for Ronald Acuna, but it's like, if you'd paid $60 for Ohtani before this season, he would have been worth every penny.
Yeah. Well, but that's, probably saw Ohtani's 90% season, Yeah. I think when you run the projections we use an aggregation of several projection systems, but I think no matter how you do it, if you do it right, you'll find that the top auction priced players, their AAVs, average auction values, are usually considerably higher than the value that your projections will get you to. And it's a question of, how much above your auction value are you willing to spend? And, if everyone is getting 1 or 2 of these guys at a premium, then, are you at a disadvantage doing so? Probably not. You also have to kind of make sure you're spending all your money at an auction. I mean, you don't want to be stuck with $10, $15 left because you let all of the better players go just to get the best possible value. I mean, you don't want to spend crazy, but you also kind of want to make sure you get players at the higher, at least a couple at the higher price level, some at the middle tiers and obviously some at the lower tiers.
Yeah, yeah. You don't want to let your guy go because he goes for $1 more, right? If you kind of know, especially if you get to during a draft. I know when you do the first time drafts and stuff, you kind of get a feel for is this guy who I'm bidding against, is he really gonna push that extra dollar? He's already got $70 wrapped up in two guys, and he hasn't drafted pitching yet. So like, is he really gonna go $32 on this? I could probably get it for that one. Like I said, you don't get to take that extra money with you into the free agent acquisition budget. It just goes away as soon as the league starts. So yeah, you don't want to be the guy, which when I was younger, I was that guy more often than not, because that's what I was doing. Let me get the most value out of every pick. I'm not going to overpay. I'm not going to pay an extra buck to get my guy because I can get something else. And then now you got 2 spots left in $19, and there's not a $5 guy in sight.
Right. That's the nightmare scenario you want to avoid. And I just find, getting a couple of the higher priced hitters, helps keep you on track. And you want these players anyway. You just have to kind of bite your tongue and pay the freight, within reason. I mean, if I can get a guy for, a top round 1 or round 2 hitter for $4 or $5 over value, that's a lot better than some of the guys will go $10 to $15 over value. So it's all relative.
Yeah, I'd rather pay an extra $5 for my preferred first baseman than an extra $4 or $5 for my backup catcher, right? Your catcher too. You don't want to pay $9 for a $4 guy, but I'll pay $38 for a 33 if it means you get to lock in kind of a known quantity, I guess you could say.
Sure.
Let's see. I think that's all we got on the auction side. Now I do want to talk about the Ultimate Leagues. I think these are just cool. These one-off high-stakes leagues with just some of the best NFBC players out there. Like you said, there was a lot of talent in the league this year in the Ultimate League. It was your first time winning it, and you won. I mean, you won by 10.5 points, which is, I think, is pretty crazy for these kinds of leagues. Like I expect these leagues to be a little bit closer because you guys are so good. You've been playing for so long. And some of you play against sort of some of the same guys quite often. It's a little bit easier for you guys to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. So before we dive into how the season actually went, with this kind of a high stakes league, how do you prep for this? Because some of the guys, it's not the big overarching like main event style league. So it's just you and 14 others. How do you get ready to face these guys and draft against them?
Okay, so a couple of things. So there's a lot of the same players year after year. There's very low turnover in this league. It's one of the most fun leagues to draft in. It actually was my second time winning it, but I won it the last year that it was a super auction, a super draft, which is it was a 2,500 buy-ins, and I won it, and then the next year it became an ultimate. So this was my first time winning the league as an ultimate, but the second time I was fortunate enough to win it.
Okay.
It is very challenging to prepare for this. There's a couple of things that make it different. So one difference is it's a standalone league. So unlike a lot of the NFBC leagues that I play in, like the main event or the auction championship, there's an overall component. And, the main event, you want to win your league, but the big carrot, the big prize is to do well in the overall. And to do well in the overall, you have to, in Roto, really have a balanced team across all 10 categories. You can't take a category or more than one category. In a standalone league, there's no overall component, so you could punt categories. I personally rarely would do that and not intentionally, but a number of the managers often will punt certain categories, and that definitely has an impact. If two guys are punting closers, for instance, that means the starting pitchers are going to be flying off the board.
Yeah.
And so you have to be prepared for that. I mean, you have to think about whether you want to punt a category or not in the standalone league. All you care about is the standings within that league, but you also have to be prepared for other managers' punting categories. The second thing and one of the things that makes this league unique, it's really it's a labor of love by Mike Machado, or Mike the Mouse Machado, MTM. And one of the things he believes in is that if you're willing to invest $5,000 in a high stakes fantasy baseball league, you should be prepared to draft for any position. So unlike the main event, which has a KDS, and when the main event fills, you typically get your draft slot 5 days in advance as the league is filled. So you have 5 days to think about, where you are on the draft board and how you want to proceed. What we do in this ultimate league is Mike gets 15 baseballs engraved with each manager's name, and they get thrown into a big barrel, and the draft facilitator picks out your name, and the first name called gets to pick where he wants to draft. Second name. So it's like a manual live KDS, and we do that 5 minutes before the draft. So 5 minutes before the draft, I had no idea whether I'm drafting first, 8th, 15th, or anywhere in between, which makes, plotting out a draft very challenging. I mean, by then, in all fairness, I've done a bunch of draft champions leagues. And so I do have experience drafting from different spots on the draft board, and I'm fully prepped and, kind of ready to go, but you can't, there's only so much you can plot out when you have no idea where you're drafting from.
Yeah. Okay. That's see, I didn't know that. That's actually one that the guys, you might have some guys tanking because there is no overall. So all you care about is the 14 other managers you're competing against. So I guess, yeah, if you can get 13s across the board in one, that's probably a lot better than just getting pins across the board.
Yep.
8 across, a couple of 8s, couple of 12s, kind of spreading it out. And I like that Mike does that. I like that there's an air of mystery to where you're going to draft, and maybe nervousness because, as you say, 5 minutes before the draft, you're sitting there just going, oh, I hope it's something I like. I hope it's in a position I like, right? I think that I have a feeling the guy who gets 15th is probably the guy sweating the most by the end of the drawing, because not only did he have to wait for 14 other managers' names to be drawn, but now he still has to wait for those 14 picks. And the turn, I think the turn in 15-team leagues is the worst spot to be in person. The 15-16, not the one and then around there, because you get the best player. You get the best player, quote unquote, in the draft, obviously with the number one pick. But those I like that those leagues have kind of their own twists that adds to it, especially with you guys being, like you said, so many of the same names and faces in those leagues. And I see that, Scott Fleming was the Yankees dynasty of the league for a little while there.
Scott won it 3 times in a row. Really one of the best fantasy players out there. And great guy. He's had quite the run.
Which is wonderful. And what I want to talk about, so we've got the prep. I know, like you said, you do enough drafts. And some of that stuff gets thrown out the window probably a little bit because, like you said, you don't know where you're drafting until almost it's time for you to draft. And you guys are sitting down at the table getting ready to go, 5 minutes. All right, you're drafting in this staff, you're drafting 10th. And just like the auction, your auction team, you led your team off with Shohei at 10. And I don't know when this draft happens. Was this one before or after?
It's a week before Vegas. So it would, Um,
So there may not have even been any chatter yet of Shohei in the game.
no, there was no story about no that gambling story broke, I think, like the Thursday or Friday out in Vegas. So this was the weekend before.
Okay, so then my question is, did you coming into the season, especially landing with that with the auction league, were you particular? Were you hoping to get Shohei bat only, or was it just more so how the draft went, and then obviously with the auction, knowing that hey, there's a couple bucks saved here, you can still get a top tier bat.
Kind of a combination. So for most of the draft season, I was off Shohei. I did not draft him in any of my draft champions leagues because he was coming back um, from surgery, and I think I had some questions whether he would be good for the for opening day. I also had some concerns about power. Bryce Harper, I think the year before, had similar surgery, and it it hurt his power for at least a little while before it came back. So I was cautious on Otani during draft champion season, but when we got when we got to the higher stakes drafts in March, he had been playing regularly in spring training games, hitting some monster home runs, and he looked good. And so for this draft, he was a target if I was, I think, anywhere between like 7 and up or 8 and up. He was he was going to be my top pick.
Okay, yeah, I
I didn't
unfortunately
have him like I didn't have him first, second, or third. I didn't expect the season that he wound up having. But if I had a kind of a middle first round pick, he was kind of my target.
he was there. Yeah, I didn't get a chance. I either had a top four pick in my redraft leagues or in my dynasty leagues and keep leagues. Like he's off limits. In fact, the in I have a big 16 team dynasty league that's been going on for like 11 years now. We've got like 80% of the same guys. The owner, the manager of Otani, his team name is no trade clause. So he just lets you know right out. He's got some stars on the team. They go nowhere. Otani is going to die with that team. I don't care if Otani plays till he's 70. It's never leaving that roster. So I unfortunately, I've never had the chance. I never got two-way Otani because the only 1 year I had him was the first year. Who split him up. So I've gotten hitting Otani 1 year, 2 years ago. But I didn't get a single taste this past year. That if anyone could have predicted the season was going to have, grabbing him, yeah, anywhere 1, 2, or 3 would have been the smartest move he could have made. And I wanted to say, I just looking at your draft, I love your drafts. I love a lot of the moves you made. A lot of the picks you made. You hit on some stuff that was really great. You got the Teoscar Hernandez career year in round 8, and he ended up being a top 25 guy. Again, William, I noticed there's like some of the same names from your auction, which the auction was after this, but Bryce Terang late. You got Nestor Cortez in there. William Contreras as your catcher 1. You got the great season out of Anthony Santander, who I don't think anyone could have predicted 40 home runs out of him this year.
No, not me. Please. Yeah, no, Santander fell, I thought, later than he should have in round 12. Um, he wasn't a priority going in. I didn't honestly have him like, I think I had him on one other bigger team, but he wasn't like a big target of mine. Um, William Contreras was. I loved his price, and I got him in 5 of my 8 like bigger FAAB leagues this past year. So he was a target, but usually I do try to diversify. Like these were my only 2 Otani teams out of my FAAB leagues. So I do believe in diversification, but one guy I kind of made an exception for this year was Contreras.
Yeah, I don't blame you. In fact, I know it's kind of crazy to say. I had Contreras as my number 1 catcher coming into the season. There was Tino last year. There was the Adley talk, and Contreras talk, and no one really knew. Obviously a healthy JT Realmuto could have been up there. It's really the only 2020 catcher. But there was just, if you really looked at it, and I grabbed Contreras in a few leagues as well, I just had no doubt that the park is great for him. He plays a ton of games. They'll DH him. The Brewers lineup was really good. He's done nothing but that. In fact, the fact that the Braves traded him and kept Sean Murphy, I to this day I wonder if they would take that back, send Sean Murphy instead of him.
Sure, but I would think they would take it back. They should take it back. I mean, that's a really really well-run organization that has made a lot of great moves in the last 4 or 5 years. But that one trade was a miss.
But also I noticed, kind of like the auction league. So you got, a top closer early, which I'd say Raisel Iglesias is a top closer. He's done extremely well for the Braves. He's great in, LA as well. And then you waited quite a while. And then again, just like in the auction league, you nailed your second reliever. Kyle Finnegan was one of the best closers in the game. And I think surprisingly so, because a lot of times when you look at the closers on the really bad teams, right, the Rockies, the Tigers, the Nationals, it's you kind of get scared away from those guys because you're like, man, he's going to get 10 saves by the end of May, and then he's going to have 2 blown saves, and all of a sudden, Dylan Florio's closing games or something. So after you had drafted Iglesias, did you intentionally wait to grab a second closer there, or was it more so just the value wasn't right on a second closer?
Just the value wasn't right. I think I had other priorities. I wanted to get more starting pitching. Remember how I told you that managers sometimes punt saves in this league? Well, they've been doing it virtually every year I've been in it, but this was one year where I don't think anybody punted a category. But in the past, I've been able to kind of wait a little longer on closers because there's usually 1 or 2 teams punting them. And I think by the time I got around to drafting Finnegan, I was probably in a desperation mode to get my second closer. And I didn't expect anything close to the performance he gave. But I did. The reason I picked him and I kind of liked him at the price was so many people were really high on Hunter Harvey going into draft season. I think people thought, including myself, to be honest, that Harvey had better skills, but the Nationals liked Finnegan in the closer role, and Harvey has always had durability issues, and so I figured that Finnegan would start with the job. I had high confidence he would start in the job. I thought, honestly, the biggest risk I thought was that he'd be traded at the trade deadline, but to a team where he would be a setup guy. But I got very lucky, and he pretty much ran with the job the whole season. But yeah, so I mean, I guess at the point in the draft, he was somewhat of a target, but I think a lot of it was luck and the way it felt to me, to be honest.
Yeah, I would say, coming into the season, I expected Harvey to close. And then, like you said, instead of Finnegan getting traded at the deadline, it was Harvey, right? He got sent to Kansas City and it almost immediately got hurt.
Yep.
Their ability issues came in right away. And he was kind of useless from that point forward. And then, I just looking, I like, again, Brett, I see Bryce Terrain here around 23. Was he a guy coming into the season that you just liked because of some changes you had seen, or is it just all the research you'd put in? Was it just the value was right each time you got him?
I would say he was more in this draft. He was more a reflection of me feeling like I was light on speed and wanted to add more speed late. I like that the Brewers. I expected them to run a lot. But with a new manager, there was some uncertainty there. But I knew Terrain had great speed, and I liked his glove. And when you have these players that have a questionable bat, I think Terrain has a questionable bat. I mean, I don't know that he's really a good hitter. I think he was played over his head for the first half of the season, and then you saw him come back to earth. But when you have a great glove, you have a longer leash in terms of playing time, and so I thought around 22 is a worthwhile gamble, but I can't around 23, but I can't tell you I expected 50 stolen bases or, I was probably hoping for 20, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, and I agree too. I always those late rounds, it's like TGFBI last year. That's how I was for playing time. I was like, okay, push come to shove, two bad bats. Who's got the better glove? Who has a tool that will keep them in the lineup more than anyone else? And that's why like guys like Jose Siri somehow always end up on my team because I know as with the Mets now, but the glove is going to keep Siri on the field, even though he's going to hit 220, but he also might go 25-25. So I'm
Right.
kind of balancing that 225 batting average with that ability. And like like you said, late you're going adding some speed, and he's a middle infielder too. He was second base and shortstop eligible, which is always nice. That means he can plug three spots for you if anything happens.
It was
But
particularly, that was particularly important to me, and because having the one and maybe only downside of drafting Otani first is you've now filled your UT slot and you have no kind of position players. I went pitcher round 2 and 3, so I'm in round 4 and I have zero outfielders, zero catchers, and zero infielders. I think I was kind of playing catch up, and that was probably one of the reasons I waited on the second closer, which just to get some more position players drafted.
fell off that.
Yeah.
That's actually something interesting. She was, you had to lock in the utility. Basically, it's locked in for the season and the first round. And I know teams did it with Marcelo Zuna as well this past season. And he was obviously a later draft pick. But how do you feel about locking one of your first, I'd say 7 to 10 picks in there? Like Brent Rooker for this upcoming season, you pointed this out to me on Twitter, is going to be utility eligible to start the year only. How early would you be willing to bank on 90% of what he did last year and locking in your utilities position for the rest of the year?
I think for the right player, you do it. I mean, I think to some extent, you if you're drafting a UT up high early, then I think you have the rest of the draft to build your flexibility. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you try to evaluate the player without the positional. Yeah, I think let me phrase it this way. I think sometimes fantasy managers um, discount the UT only players a little too much, and I think if I didn't have any regrets sticking Otani in my UT position every week, and I don't think anyone who knows Zuna had any complaints about it whatsoever. I mean, and it just makes me think it's tough to talk about as a Yankees fan, but I put aside my fandom for fantasy baseball. I mean, for years David Ortiz was drafted well after he should have been. I mean, he just you could get your discounts on him, and I think there's so many players now with platooning and kind of increased flexibility that even once the season starts, so many players add multi-position eligibility that locking up its UT spot on a stud hitter is really not that constraining. I mean, I think you can build around it if you're taking a guy early, and you could draft a couple of multi-positional guys, and you'll add some during the season. I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe it's a minor negative, but I don't think it's as big as some people treat.
I think I have to agree there. I know I won a league last year with Ozuna locked in, but obviously I was, that he was drafted. I think after the 10th round. There was, hesitation on could he replicate his season, and then obviously it was even better this year than it was last year. And I swear that's just Braves and voodoo magic going on over there with some of these guys who, we think are done, and then they break out and they can move on from. But now I would just like to, I want to pick your brain a little bit with you said you basically took off a little bit for the baseball playoffs. So you can sit back, just kind of enjoy the playoffs, enjoy what's going on. And you say you've already got a couple of draft and holds go in the books, correct? And Gladiator. Um, do you like what kind of tools do you use throughout the season to kind of like track how you're drafting? You know, when you decide when you go into each of the different drafts, like you said, you like to try. Well, let's go pitching heavy here. Let's go hitting heavy here. Reliever over starter here. How do you make those decisions before the draft or during the draft?
Usually during the draft, I'll see how the draft let it come to me for the most part, unless there's like a build I'm really curious about, I want to try out, and maybe it'll be, kind of preordained during one of my early draft champions leagues. But for the most part, I like to let drafts come to me with, I, there'll be some targets, but I'm not the type of person who will like map out 10 rounds or 15 rounds and follow it. Um, I just don't do that. I have the players I like, but I want to be open to changing things up depending on how the draft goes.
Okay.
That kind of what you
Yeah.
said?
Yeah, yeah. And would you say you do the same like with regular drafts and with auctions? Like, I know in the past, like, there's some specific auction strategies. Like, you do like the 260, the 200 hitting, 60 pitching. It's been a long time since I've seen it done. The $9 on pitching and the
Yeah.
251 on hitting, which I think is absolutely crazy, but it can work. You have the Lima claim, all the fun, these fun little acronyms and stuff. Have you ever tried to stick to one of those plans regardless of how the draft is going?
No. For a couple of reasons. One, the auctions that I do, like in the auction championship, I think it was maybe 1,500 last year, 1,600 this year. That's way too much money to be playing around or experimenting. And also, they're part of an overall competition. So I'm trying to get roster, statistical balance on my team. So I'm not going to try, kind of extreme strategy for these. Um, it's not something I tend to do. But I think one of the ways I try to think of the player pool is I try to divide up the player pool for auctions into three different categories. One are my targets, the guys I really want, and that's a smaller group. And then there's my second group is kind of the players that I like that I'm willing to roster at the right price, that I'm not really going to be paying up for, but at the right price, I'm open to them. And then there's players that I really don't have an interest in. And I mean, it's not anything unique or special, this kind of system, but I think it helps me kind of make the split second decisions that I do during the draft. There have been times where I think during an auction, especially if like you haven't rostered a player in half an hour or so, some player comes out and they're going for $3 or $4 under their AAV. There's a temptation to maybe go for them, but if they're not, I get, at least in my experience, I've found that if they're not really a target or a player I like, I usually regret it. I mean, there was one year my partner Mark and I, we weren't planning on rostering Joey Votto. It was towards, it was past, he was past his prime, not at the very end of his career. He was past his prime, and he wasn't a target. We didn't particularly like him, but he was, the bidding stalled at like $4 or $5 under what we expected him to go at, and so we wound up rostering him and almost immediately regretted it. He didn't pay off, and we just decided from that point forward that we were going to try to limit ourselves to our targets and the guys we like at a price, and just not roster guys we're down on. And no matter what price they're going at and how much the temptation is. So, so that's not a huge group too. I mean, there's a lot, in an auction, you have to kind of be open and flexible and see how the auction goes. And so, I mean, there's a large body of players that at the right price on roster, but there are certain guys that I'm just, because, you get one first baseman and you get one corner infielder position. And, even if you get a good price on a player you're not crazy about, now you're stopped from rostering a first baseman or maybe a corner that you like a lot in an auction. And maybe goes for an attractive price half an hour later. I mean, you just, it's not like, kind of a snake draft where, you can get another, two other first basemen or something, it's one.
Now, when it comes to the actual auction strategy, are you the type, or do you prefer to only throw out names of guys you definitely want to roster, or do you play? Are you kind of you take the gamesmanship and maybe intentionally throw out the guys that, like, you'll say it doesn't matter what this guy goes for, I'm not interested in him, just to take money off the table?
I do both. I don't want to be predictable at all. Some guys I will want, some guys I might have an interest in, and other guys I have no interest in. And I'll throw them out. I think, sometimes later on in the draft, if you're on the lower end of the money, you might want to try to get some more money off the table. But I try to, even if I'm not interested in a player, I try to learn something from my nominations, so like, there might be a closer that I'm not particularly interested in. I want to get some money off the table, but I also want to know, what's the closer market going to go for? Because I might like a guy in a similar range I like a lot better, but I want to see what this guy is going for before I call out my guy. It's just, you try to get a feel for, the starting pitching market early in the draft. Are these pitchers is this pure pitching going to go 25, 26, or are they going to be up at 28, 29? So I think you want to try to learn something or have some purpose other than, or in addition to getting money off the table. But there's a lot of times I'll nominate a player that I don't have a particular interest in.
Okay, I like that. I like the gamesmanship, but also gaining something from it. Going, okay, maybe I really don't want. I don't want to play Holmes, for instance, right? Because he's gonna allow runs, but also he does get treated like a kind of an upper mid-level closer. Like you said, okay, I'm gonna nominate him. Let me see what they're gonna pay for him. What am I gonna have to pay for a guy in the same range of him? But what's he gonna go for first? I like that. I like that. Yeah.
You want to try to gain something from it. So let me give you an example. Let's say you really like Brett Rooker at his price. So if I'm in that position, probably my first two nominations are going to be Shohei Ohtani and Marcell Ozuna, because then when Rooker comes out, I'm competing against 12 players instead of 14, because two players will already locked up their UT position, will be ineligible to bid on Rooker. So by nominating Ohtani and Ozuna, I've taken two players out of the pool for Rooker. So that's just kind of an example of, trying to accomplish something with a nomination.
And that's got twofold. It's like, okay, you're getting to your guy, but also you've kind of played two people who didn't realize they were getting played to that position. Maybe not whoever does get them, it's not those intentional, but like you said, now, hey, you guys are done. You don't even look at those two guys. Here's the other 12. And if you already know, like, I know this guy, I know some people who will never draft or bid on guys who are utility eligible only. I know players like that because they don't want to be locked in to that spot. But like you said, if it's a Shohei Ohtani, if it's a Marcell Ozuna, I think Rooker can be put. That's 2 years now of pretty great production. If you know what you're getting from the utility, what's it matter if they're not position flexible? Especially in like the NFBC leagues where it's, you're changing your roster once a week, and that's on Fridays. Like, what you're getting, it's going to be worth it. But yeah, I like that. The gamesmanship like that. I've never looked at it that way of going, okay, what if I don't, they can kind of clear two people out by locking in a position already. And I've never really thought about the fact that you get the information from just not winning a guy that you nominate as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be learned by how, where the players are going. I think you got to be careful too, like on where players are in a tier. Like let's say there's you know, 4 third basemen that are in a tier, and then there's a clear drop off. You probably, and if you want one in that tier, you probably don't want to wait until your guy is the last one in the tier, because then people are going to want to pay up for him and not have to go down a tier. So sometimes, like if there's a tier of 4 or 5 players in a position, the one that's called out last sometimes can go for the most money. So sometimes, if I see that a tier is starting to fill out, then I might nominate my guy earlier to make sure he's not the last in the tier. And so, someone else might, others will be bidding on him too, but maybe just the existence of someone else in the same tier will cause someone to, not go the extra dollar and just decide to wait for the next guy. So, just little strategies that sometimes work and sometimes don't work and can backfire, but that's, you try to play the odds.
Like these are winning strategies, right? This is you're the defending Auction League Championship winner. These are all winning strategies you're giving us. Okay, we're all going to take these this year. We're going to win our leagues, and if we don't, we get to, I'm like, hey, don't blame Mike. You didn't do Mike's plan the same way. That's what I'm going to tell him. You just didn't execute it as well. But Mike, before we get out of here, we'll run a little long now. The one thing I want to ask you is, what advice would you give to fantasy players who have never played in high stakes leagues or in any of the NFBC leagues, even the small ones, $50 DCs and stuff like that? What advice would you give them for them to start to dip their toes in to a more competitive area of fantasy baseball?
Yeah, I would say to start out at the lower end of the price range and do the leagues, jump in. I mean, the NFBC has a wide array of contests at different price points, including lower price points and different formats. And they're all great leagues. Jump in and try to build a bankroll. They also have certain satellite leagues where I think for $50, if you win the league, you get a free. The prize is an entry into the online championship league. And then there's also satellites that I think have a $150 price point, where if you win the league, you get a main event entry the following year. So there's some ways to build up. But I understand it's a process. I think people shouldn't necessarily rush it. The higher stakes leagues are filled with people who are very experienced and ultra competitive, and I think it's probably best, unless you have a lot of discretionary money, to work your way up to them. It took me a while to get the courage up to press the button and join my first $150 Draft Champions League over about 12 years ago. It was probably about triple the cost of the highest fantasy league I had done to date, and it's a process. And I'd say also, when you jump into leagues, watch what the better, more experienced players, managers do. I don't mean like copy their picks, because that's not a winning strategy. But look how they build their teams. I think one of the biggest differentiators between average players and very good players is roster construction, and how they build it, at least in Roto, how they build their teams. And I think watching them, and diving into some of the winning strategies but knowing the player pool is critical. Um, that would be my advice. Start slow, work your way up, and learn and have fun doing it.
Yeah, I think that's the key there too. Is just have fun. Remember, it's a game. It's a game. It costs a little bit of money, but you can win some and learn. And as my grandfather used to tell me, the best lessons are learned by losing money. Right? I feel like in fantasy baseball, to truly experience, I like how people take it real serious. Is everyone's got to have some money invested in it. People take it a little bit more serious than free leagues. But Mike, I do want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to hang out and just talk fantasy baseball with me. I had a great time with you. I do want to let people know you do write over at fpnfantasy.com. You're on Twitter at Bronx Yankees 23. Is there anything else you want to shout out for you? Any other social media platforms or anything?
No, that's all I'm on. FTN is a great place, and we are coming out with our draft guide in mid-December. I'll have several articles in it, including one touching on auction strategy.
Well, awesome, man. I can't look forward to it. I do. I love going there, looking at your guys' stuff. Vlad Sedler, one of your fellow writers, is one of my favorite guys in all of fantasy. He's one of the nicest guys on Twitter. But I just want to thank you guys for joining me and Mike on this episode of Fantasy MLB Today. Has been a Sports Ethos presentation. You can find us on Spotify, Audible, iTunes, our website at sportsethos.com, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Hope you guys have a great night. This episode was presented by Bet Online.